Hello, horror lovers. If you enjoy this story, please support the channel with a like, a comment, and a subscription. Now let's begin. The disappearance of Jacob. Jacob had never smoked inside the house. Mary, his wife, could not stand tobacco smoke. Jacob loved his wife, though not enough to give up the harmful habit completely. Still, whenever Mary grumbled, he obeyed. He would step outside, sit on the bench in the backyard, and light a cigarette. And now, despite the late December evening, Jacob shuffled out to his usual smoking spot. It was freezing, but there was no wind. Snow crunched under his feet. Moonlight had silvered the plain winter evening, making it feel strangely unreal, almost like a fairy tale. Jacob sat down on the bench and took out a pack of cigarettes. He could have smoked inside the house long ago, but he still did not. The habit of going outside, formed over many years, had stayed with him. Jacob's house stood on a rise. In spring, during the floods, the Vanta River would come dangerously close, but not once had it ever reached his plot. He had been lucky. Now the river lay silent, locked beneath ice. Beyond the river, the taiga darkened, and it seemed to Jacob that shadows were hiding there among the trees. Shadows just as silent as the river itself, and just as dangerous. Jacob remembered how his grandfather used to tell him stories when he was a child. Not the kind of stories people usually tell children. Not instructive tales with a little moral, kind endings, and happiness at the close. No, they were frightening stories, the kind that made the heart tighten in the chest the moment you looked toward the silent edge of the taiga. His grandfather had been gone for many years now, but those stories still echoed in Jacob's head. He had been born in this small taiga settlement on the bank of the Vanta River, and he had never wanted to leave. Jacob loved the endless forests of the taiga. Dense forests, ancient forests, forests full of secrets and danger. He loved the fresh air. He loved the silence, which in winter became almost dead. December had come snowy and bitterly cold that year. The snowdrifts in the garden quickly rose higher than a meter. Almost every morning began with Jacob clearing snow. He did not complain. He was still not an old man, not really. A little over 60. Clearing snow in the morning was almost like exercise. But cooking, yes, cooking was another matter. He simply did not have the strength for cooking anymore. And truth be told, he had grown used to Mary always handling that. But his wife had died 3 years ago, and now he had to cook his own food. God had given them no children. Mary had only been pregnant once, when they were young, right after they married. But it ended in a late miscarriage. To this day, Jacob still dreamed of that blood-covered infant, his tiny arms and legs twitching in spasms. He had still been alive when he came out of Mary's womb. They saved Mary then, but not the baby. Polly, that was what Jacob had named him. If he had stayed inside his mother's belly for another 2 weeks, Polly might have had a chance at birth. That was what the doctor had said. Their son, that tiny boy, had breathed for only a few minutes. And in those few minutes, Jacob had loved him with his whole heart. Jacob was living out the rest of his years alone. Only in summer, and during the New Year holidays, did his grandnephew Max come to visit him. Max was his brother's grandson. And during those short visits, loneliness did not press down on Jacob like a heavy block of ice. This year, Max was not coming. Last spring, he had joined the army. He called once a month, which was already something. Jacob loved Max like his own son. Sometimes it even seemed to him that Max was Polly. Clouds of vapor escaped Jacob's mouth together with the smoke. Lost in thought, he finished the cigarette and reached for a second one. New Year was coming soon. Should he really sit here alone like a cuckoo in an empty house? Or should he go to a friend in the neighboring village? He did not want to leave the house or the dog Brutus. But he did not want to greet the year alone either. Suddenly, Brutus let out a mournful howl, as if he had heard his master's thoughts. The dog ran up to him and pressed his warm, wet nose into Jacob's palm. Jacob flinched. The cigarette slipped from his fingers and sank into the snow. The small red ember blinked once and went out. "I'll stay home, you damned thing," Jacob said affectionately, and ruffled the fur along the dog's neck. "I'm not going anywhere. We'll celebrate together, you and me. And someone from the men will probably stop by anyway, to drink a shot or two and smoke." "I'm not going," Jacob repeated more firmly now. Whether he was speaking to Brutus or to himself, he did not know. The Vanta River gleamed in the moonlight. The silence soothed the ear. Jacob could have sat there on the bench forever, enjoying the peace of the northern night. But then Brutus suddenly bristled. He began to growl. "What is it, Brutus boy?" The dog was staring at the river, still growling. Could he have sensed an animal? The thought flashed through Jacob's mind. A couple of times he had seen a wolf pack crossing the river in winter. After that, in several villages, the gray predators had slaughtered dogs at night, mercilessly, silently, and by morning, the snow would be red with blood. In winter, Jacob always brought everything onto the veranda of the house, and the dog, sensing the predators, would usually ask to come in on his own. Only now something was wrong. Jacob felt it in his gut. He needed to go inside, into the house. But curiosity took over. Jacob stood up, walked closer to the fence, and looked toward the Dvina. Everything seemed the same as always. Quiet, peaceful, no wolves on the river. A false alarm. No one was there. No one, just as it should have been on that frozen river. He was about to go back into the house, but then movement on the river caught his eye. Jacob narrowed his eyes, staring into the distance. Yes, someone was walking there, along the fisherman's path, barely visible in the snow. A small, thin figure was gliding across the ice, absurdly waving its arms. A person. Jacob froze where he stood. The figure came closer, and the closer it drew to the bank, the harder Jacob's heart hammered inside his chest. A child. There was no doubt. An exhausted, weakened child was crossing the river. Jacob's heart lurched and tightened painfully. He was already ready to rush down to meet him, but Brutus seized his trouser leg in his teeth. "What are you doing? He needs help." It seemed to Jacob that it was Polly, his son, walking across the ice, that somehow by some miracle he had survived, and now he was coming to his father. But the dog seemed not to understand. Jacob had to use force. He struck Brutus across the muzzle. The dog pressed his belly to the ground and began to whine. "He needs help," Jacob repeated, shifting his gaze from the dog back to the river. And then he went cold. There was no one, only the river. White, silent. What the? Had he imagined it? Jacob looked around in confusion and listened. The silence was dead, like a cemetery. How could that be? It could not be. He was still in his right mind. He had seen a child walking across the river. He could not have imagined something for that long. That does not happen. Brutus bristled again and began to growl. And then Jacob felt how terribly cold it had become. So cold that his breath caught in his chest, the way it does when a 40-degree frost suddenly strikes. Goosebumps ran down his spine, and all at once he wanted desperately to get back inside, back into the warmth. Jacob understood he was not alone when he saw the shadow. Small, blurred, like an amoeba. It fell beside him. Slowly, he turned to meet the one it belonged to face to face. His mouth opened in a silent scream. One glance at that thing was enough. Pain pierced Jacob's entire body, thousands of tiny icy shards driving through him at once. A hot piece of bloody flesh spread in a dark blotch near the bench. Inside his head, a voice began to speak. Quiet, but insistent, and with every word, the pain broke his will. Everything that had come before was drowned beneath Brutus's furious barking. The dog watched his master wander out across the river, leaving bloody stains on the white snow. Then Brutus leapt down from the hill and rushed after him. He ran, but he could not catch up. The figure of his master kept moving farther and farther away. Still, Brutus did not give up. Chapter 1. Max walked from the ferry toward his uncle's house. The gentle June sun warmed him. A light breeze carried the smell of blooming lilacs and freshly cut grass. He could hear the chirping of grasshoppers, the buzzing of bumblebees, the shrieks and laughter of local children, and the noise of a chainsaw somewhere nearby. The settlement on the bank of the Dvina River was living its usual summer life, and no one there paid any attention to the solidly built young man in camouflage. Max loved coming here, to his grandfather's homeland. Almost a year and a half had passed since his last visit, and nothing seemed to have changed. The same little houses still stood there. The air was still easy and good to breathe. Everything would have been fine, except his uncle Jacob had vanished under mysterious circumstances. Jacob, his grandfather's own brother, had stepped outside to smoke one late December evening and disappeared. They searched for him. They never found him. It was as if his uncle had dropped straight through the earth. Only a bloody trail, maybe Jacob's and maybe not, stretched across the entire fisherman's path on the Dvina, reaching all the way to the edge of the forest on the far bank. Then it ended sharply. They found only the padded jacket he had worn when he went out to smoke, and his silver baptismal cross. No body, no signs of a struggle. The house greeted Max with silence. A ringing, tense silence. A thin layer of dust covered the furniture and the floors, making the relatives and the portraits on the walls seem to stare out with reproach. Max's heart tightened. He was not used to seeing his uncle's house like this. Even after Aunt Mary died, his uncle had kept everything clean, and the house had always felt warm and lived in. Max threw open the doors and windows and started cleaning. He beat the rugs, blankets, and pillows. He washed the floors. He wiped away the dust. He heated the stove to get rid of the stale smell. Before he noticed it, evening had arrived in the middle of all those chores. After a hastily prepared dinner, Max went out into the backyard and sat down on the smoking bench. Thoughtfully, he stared at the river. He himself did not smoke, but before, he had always liked sitting beside his uncle there. Even now, it seemed to him that he could smell tobacco, as if his uncle were sitting beside him, as if there had been no disappearance, no bloody trail across the snow, no abandoned silver cross. The stony bank cut into the water. Fish splashed. Somewhere far away, a boat motor droned. The pike were feeding now, and the riverbank was scattered with locals. He and his uncle had also loved walking along the shore in the evenings and fishing together. Max sighed. They would not do that again. There was no chance his uncle was alive. At least that was what his father and grandfather had said. But Max did not believe it. It seemed to him that somewhere in the taiga, his uncle was wandering lost and could not find his way back. It sounded naive, childish even, but Max could not shake the thought. Something wet and warm touched his leg. "Brutus," Max exclaimed, and rubbed the dog behind the scruff. "How did you sneak up so quietly?" Brutus placed his gray head on Max's knees. His brown eyes looked at the young master with grief. They probably said a great deal. Near Jacob's padded jacket, Brutus had growled when the men tried to pull him away. Then he had howled, long, mournful, almost like a wolf. That was how Max's father and grandfather had told it. They had wanted to take Brutus with them, but the dog resisted. The gate in the backyard creaked. Without waiting for an invitation, the neighbor John entered the yard. He was a strong old man, and he had been Jacob's friend. "Hello," Max said. "Evening," John replied. John sat down beside him, lit a cigarette, stayed silent for a while, and then continued. "The dog won't go anywhere. He'll live out his years here, waiting for his master. Don't try to call him away. Respect his choice. We feed Brutus. He doesn't go hungry. He sleeps under the house, where the wolves can't reach him in winter. Uncle Jacob is alive. He's alive." The neighbor shrugged and answered thoughtfully. "Who knows? Anything can happen." Max gave a faint smile. His father and grandfather insisted otherwise. But they did not live here. The locals would know better whether Uncle Jacob could have survived or not. "See what Brutus has become?" John said. "He's gone completely gray, and he isn't even an old dog. What did he see that night? And should we even know? Did you notice anything suspicious?" "Not really. It was a freezing evening, but quiet and clear. I saw Jacob go out to smoke around that hour, but I didn't think anything of it. He always smoked outside. Who could have known it would end like that?" Max said nothing. He also knew about his uncle's habit of smoking outside, and there had been nothing suspicious about the fact that he left the house late in the evening. Closer to night, Max decided to take a walk along the riverbank after all. He brought a spinning rod and mosquito spray with him. He had to do something. Otherwise, the thoughts troubling his mind could drive him insane. Brutus went with him. The arrival of the young master had revived the dog a little. He had begun, faintly, to resemble his old self again. The wind rose, and a light ripple moved over the water. Max was lucky enough to pull out a small pike and a perch, but he released them back into the river. They were far too small. On the way, he came across several local men. They nodded in greeting, but did not join him. Max knew almost all of them. Only Yuri, the gamekeeper's son, stopped to talk for a moment. He promised he would come by tomorrow. During the day or evening, Yuri said he would stop by to chat and tell him something interesting. Without noticing it, Max reached the abandoned little village whose remains could still be seen from the riverbank. Old houses sagged with time. The plots were overgrown with tall grass. The village had emptied out about 10 years earlier. People had left in search of a new life and never returned. Many tales were told about the reason. One of them claimed that something undead had begun coming out of the taiga and visiting the village, tormenting the people who lived there. Max stopped. As a boy, he had believed that story. Now it seemed like a foolish, ridiculous fairy tale. Or maybe it was not. Why else had people left so quickly? Why had none of them even tried to sell their plots? And why, when residents of neighboring villages asked questions, did they only wave them off and keep silent? In the distance, the crimson glow of the sun sank below the horizon. A white June night descended over the northern settlement. The wind died on the river. The waves stopped striking the shore. Even the mosquitoes stopped their nasty whining. Max suddenly felt deeply uneasy. He wanted to hide from the all-seeing eye that had arrived together with the night. But he could not move from the spot. He simply stood there, enchanted by the summer night. Maybe it really was a spirit that had taken his uncle. Brutus barked. Not angrily, but firmly, as if to say, "What are you standing there for, Maxie? Let's go home. Enough walking for today." "There are no spirits here," Max said. "No reason to stand around like a fool." "You're right, Brutus." Brutus barked once, then even rose up on his hind legs. Max burst out laughing and ran toward the house. Brutus bolted after him. The night came alive, reminding him that this was still only the very beginning of the short northern summer. Max quickly climbed the stairs leading up to his uncle's property. He stood there for a while, thoughtful, looking at the river and the dark forest on the far side. "What happened back then, Brutus?" he asked. The dog only whined pitifully in reply and nudged him with his head, as if saying it was not worth stirring up the past. A chill seemed to drift from somewhere. Max shivered and hurried into the house. He collapsed onto the bed, feeling damnably exhausted, and at once fell into a heavy, dreamless sleep. Through his sleep, he heard whining. Someone's whisper. But he paid it no attention. The next day, closer to evening, Yuri dropped by to see Max. Dark-haired, swarthy, restless. In 2 years, he had not changed at all. He had not grown more manly. He remained the same thin, wiry boy, always drawn to tricks and adventures. Yuri brought beer and dried fish with him. Until late into the night, they sat on the veranda, drank beer, and talked about this and that. Soon, the conversation turned to Uncle Jacob's disappearance. "I went with the men along the trail," Yuri admitted. "It was a terrible sight, a bloody track across the whole river. But your uncle was walking with a steady step. Almost strolling, I'd say. Of course, at first we didn't know it was his trail. We only understood when we saw Brutus sitting on his padded jacket." "Yes, I know," Max interrupted. "My father and grandfather told me. But they weren't there. I saw it with my own eyes. There was a trail, and then there wasn't. There had been a person, and then it was like he had evaporated. Strange, right? And those bloody scraps, that was something else." "What scraps?" Max asked. "Pieces of meat, like your uncle was falling apart while he walked. Exactly like a corpse from the movies." Max went cold as he imagined his uncle's walking skeleton with scraps of flesh still clinging to the bones. "The stink was like a slaughterhouse," Yuri continued. A delayed thought flashed through Max's mind. His friend was exaggerating. "I once went to a place where they cut up pigs and cows," Yuri said. "That morning across the river, it stank exactly the same." "Well," Max drawled, looking at Yuri with distrust. "Don't play dumb," Yuri said. "You didn't come here for no reason. You want to know what happened to your uncle. Maybe you even think he's alive." "Maybe I do think that. That's why I want to help. I liked your uncle. He was a good man." Yuri was silent for a moment, then added, "Though of course it's not likely he's alive." Yuri suggested they go to the other side of the river, to the place where Jacob had vanished. They could take a boat, pretend they were going fishing, and actually investigate the forest. It was risky, but terribly interesting, breathlessly exciting. Maybe we'll at least find some remains and bury them properly. Max did not believe there was anything left of his uncle. Even so, he agreed. Yuri left around 3 in the morning. Max lay awake, staring at the white night outside the window. His heart beat anxiously in his chest. The pulse throbbed at his temple. Was he really a coward? He had come to the place where, under mysterious circumstances, his uncle had vanished. He had to go there. He had to look. He He had to make sure. Without realizing it, he fell asleep. In the dream, he was standing in the backyard. Beyond the property, the Dvina River lay white, bound in ice. The moonlit night flooded everything around him with its ghostly glow. Along the fisherman's path, a person was slowly trudging. Max thought it was his uncle. But the person was too far away, and there was no way to say for certain who it was. Max wanted to shout. Maybe the walker would hear him and turn around. But his throat had gone dry, and his tongue had stiffened and would not obey. Brutus was running after the person. Running, but unable to catch up. Max was about to rush after them too, but a heavy hand settled on his shoulder. You look, but you do not see. The hollow voice sounded as if it came from beneath the earth. That voice made Max feel horribly uneasy. Still, he turned around, preparing to face something terrible, and immediately exhaled in relief. There was no one there. He had imagined it. Only for some reason, the air was thick. So thick it felt as though someone were standing nearby. Someone invisible. It became hard to breathe, as if that someone had squeezed his throat with steel fingers. The Taiga wants to drink. Max woke up. It was bright. Impossible to tell whether it was day or night. He looked at the clock. Just after 3 in the morning. He had barely slept at all. But he no longer wanted to close his eyes. Chapter 2. The next day, just as they had agreed, Yuri and Max headed to the other side of the river. Yuri took his grandfather's boat and lied to him, saying he and a friend were going to the lake to fish for a couple of days. Max brought food and a tent. He warned his parents that he would be out of reach for a while, so they would not worry or panic. Max and Yuri crossed the river fairly quickly. They dragged the boat onto the bank and hid it in the bushes. Yuri explained that there was no need for the locals to see where they were heading. Then he pointed toward the dark forest nearby and said quietly, "See that fallen tree? Your uncle's padded jacket was lying there. The cross, and scraps of flesh. That was where the search began." Max looked into the distance from beneath his hand. The thick forest drew him in, beckoning, calling him closer. But Max and Yuri both froze. 1 minute passed. Then another. "Well?" Yuri asked quietly, breaking the silence that had already begun to scrape at their nerves. "Are we going?" "We're going. Why stand here?" Their legs sank into the sand. The sun burned the backs of their necks. Max kept feeling that if he turned around, the familiar world would disappear forever. The boat hidden beneath the branches grew smaller and smaller with every step. With every meter, Max felt more and more uneasy. He remembered the neighbor's warning. He remembered the dream he had seen the night before. "You know," Yuri said suddenly, stopping, "I didn't tell you everything." They had already reached the fallen pine. A few more steps, and they would have entered the forest path. Then the pines would have closed in around them from every side. But apparently, before doing that, Yuri decided to share something. He sat down on the pine, lit a cigarette, and began to speak. "That morning, we agreed among ourselves that we wouldn't stir up panic. We saw it." Yuri fell silent, searching for the right words. "Saw what?" Max whispered. Yuri exhaled loudly and continued. "There were 5 of us. Me, my father, your uncle's neighbor John, and the Miller brothers. We shouted. We called for Uncle Jacob, but no one answered. We went maybe 300 meters into the forest. Not more. Then we stopped. And do you know what we saw, Max? A figure? A human figure? Was it my uncle? No, Max. That figure wasn't human. Then what was it? I don't know. It stood a few meters away from us. Horrible. Gray. Faceless. Like it had been woven out of fog. It was looking at us. And the frost around us kept growing stronger." Yuri swallowed. My nose started bleeding. The others probably had blood too. A little longer, and we would have frozen to death. If my father hadn't shouted. The figure twitched, merged with a tree, and disappeared. My father ordered us to get out before worse trouble came. Let the police deal with it after that. So we left. We decided not to tell anyone. They would have thought we were insane. And there was no need to spread panic anyway. People are already running from the settlement. Max sat down beside him. The treetops rustled softly. Another local tale? Max asked skeptically, knowing how much his friend loved frightening stories. Yuri looked at him strangely and answered, "Actually, it's true. The Miller brothers left after that. So did several other families. Then why are you coming with me? If that forest bogeyman is there, Why? You ask too many questions. I want to go, so I'm going. Well, since I haven't scared you off, let's move. The forest path began. Max and Yuri walked at least 3 kilometers, maybe more. They were sweating. They were tired. But they saw nothing interesting or suspicious. The forest was simply a forest. Pines, firs, aspens, even birches here and there. There were too many broken trees, perhaps, but Yuri said that after Uncle Jacob vanished, a terrible storm had hit. That was why the search had been stopped. Uncle Jacob had been officially declared missing. They stopped to rest. They sat for a while, drank some water, and each ate a sandwich. Where do we go next? Max asked. To the crooked cabin. Yuri waved his hand toward the side. At least another 3 kilometers to scrape through. Max had heard about the crooked cabin from Uncle Jacob. He had even been there once, though he had been very small then. The hut stood near a lake. And despite its name, it was not crooked at all. It was an ordinary log hunting cabin. It had been built by an old hermit who had spent his whole life wandering through the taiga from one place to another. That old man had lived 100 years ago, maybe even longer. But quite a few huts were still left in the area after him. There were stories that the crooked hermit had been a sorcerer, a man with witch blood in him, or maybe even the forest spirit himself. In short, he had been a serious old man, and angering him was not something anyone should do. You know, people are afraid of these woods, Yuri started again. They were winding between tall pines. Max kept looking back uneasily, afraid of getting lost, but Yuri assured him everything was under control and that he knew the forest perfectly. After all, he was the gamekeeper's son. Why are they afraid? Because of the old sorcerer? Max asked. No, Yuri waved it off. Before, people came here calmly, hunting, fishing, mushrooms, berries. They honored the old man's memory and respected the forest laws. But Yuri went quiet. The fallen trees forced them to climb over trunks. The ground was covered with branches and fallen needles. So, Yuri continued, people stopped wandering here after your uncle disappeared. They're afraid of the silhouette. Max smirked. He still could not believe Yuri's story. He thought his friend had invented it to make crawling around the forest more exciting. Forget you, Yuri muttered. Though, you know, I probably wouldn't believe it either if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes. And you're not scared? That was winter. Now it's summer. The silhouette is sleeping. Well, doubting Thomas. Yuri sounded offended. They walked the rest of the way to the crooked cabin in silence. Yuri sniffed resentfully. Max chuckled at his friend. He had known since childhood that Yuri was an inventor and a dreamer. It was hard to believe his story. More accurately, impossible. Fishermen had often visited the lake near the crooked cabin. But then the fish had stopped biting. The water in the lake had darkened and begun to smell rotten. No one had come to the lake for about 5 years. And that had been a mistake. The lake had changed. There was no trace left of the rotten smell. It smelled pleasantly of silt and forest. Fish splashed in the clean water. Apparently, the lake had rested, gathered its strength, and come back to life. Beautiful, Max exclaimed. That it is, Max. Even if we learn nothing and find nothing, at least we'll get some rest. The hut remained just as it had been in Max's memory. Time had been merciful to it. Or maybe the old sorcerer had built it to last forever, using magic. Who could know? Max and Yuri went inside. They lit the stove to drive out the stale smell. They cooked porridge with canned meat. They ate lunch and talked about this and that. They decided they would live there for a couple of days, fish, wander through the forest, and maybe find something. Max could barely believe they would find anything. Too much time had passed. Still, it was worth trying. It was better than simply sitting in the house and guessing what had happened to his uncle. Of course, it was a shame they had not brought Brutus with them. But since morning, the dog had hidden somewhere and refused to come when called. Shall we swim? Yuri suggested. Max agreed. Washing off the sweat and dirt sounded like a good idea. The water in the lake turned out to be cool, even cooler than the Dvina. By then, the wind had already risen. The sun had slipped behind a cloud. It grew darker. The moody northern summer was gathering rain. But Yuri and Max paid no attention to the changeable weather. They swam until they were completely chilled. Then they climbed out, sat on the shore, and watched the sky darken above them, turning a good sunny day into gloom. When a drizzle began, They took shelter in the hut. Against the wall stood iron cans filled with grain, sugar, and tea, left there by previous fishermen and hunters. That was the custom, to leave provisions in forest huts. Yuri immediately told another local tale about a young man who had gotten lost the year before, wandered through the forest for several days, and then finally made it back to people. After that, he began telling another story. Yuri loved to talk. Max listened with only half an ear. The dream would not leave his mind, and it seemed as though the air around him was becoming just as dense, as if a voice were about to come out of it at any moment. You look, but you do not see. The Taiga wants to drink. Max flinched when he felt something touch his shoulder. He nearly cried out. A chill ran across his skin, and his heart beat anxiously against his ribs like a trapped bird. He looked around in fear, but there was no one in the hut except Yuri. "What's wrong with you?" Yuri asked. "Hell if I know. I feel uneasy. Like someone touched me." Yuri looked around too, then snorted. "You imagined it." Then he admitted, "I'm uneasy too. Every time I remember that figure made of fog, everything inside me goes cold. But don't worry. Everything will be fine." Max smiled crookedly. "Looks like the rain stopped. Come on, Max. Let's take a walk." They searched through the small forest behind the lake. Or rather, they walked through it, looking around. They covered 3 kilometers, maybe more. They found nothing suspicious. Nothing interesting either. Then they returned to the crooked cabin. Evening was coming. Clouds covered the sky again. There wasn't supposed to be any rain in the forecast, Yuri complained. Max only waved it off. They could sit in the hut, or return to the settlement. The last option was probably the right one. A bad feeling had been gnawing at him since morning. They should never have gone into the taiga looking for trouble. Still, that evening before sunset, they fished despite the light rain. The fish were biting well. Soon they had pulled up half a bucket, mostly pike. They might have stayed there much longer if a gust of wind had not carried a stench toward them. "What the?" Max broke off. "It smells like rotten meat," Yuri suggested uncertainly, glancing around with caution. "Wolverine. An aggressive animal. Dangerous too. Running into one is more trouble than it's worth. I remember my father telling me about them once. Let's go back to the hut, Max." Max did not argue. He knew about wolverines himself. Only was it really a wolverine? Or was the forest spirit angry because they had come there? They locked the hut with the bolt. Through the window, darkness gathered outside. Max did not feel like sleeping at all. Yuri took a bottle of homemade moonshine from his backpack. "Took it from Grandpa. Shall we have some?" Max shrugged. Why not? It was better than listening to the echoes of the forest and wondering who wandered around the lake at night. They lay down to sleep deep after midnight. By then, they had forgotten about the wolverine and the forest spirit and the strange silhouette, and even why they had come into the taiga in the first place. The moonshine from Yuri's grandfather had been strong. Max woke at dawn with a headache and a full bladder. Quietly, so as not to wake Yuri, he stepped out of the hut. The sun was only beginning to rise into the sky, tinting the gray gloom with washed-out tones. Somewhere in the thick of the forest, birds were crying out. Nervously, piercingly, the stench of rot had been replaced by a heavy metallic smell. Max grimaced, but did not pay it much attention. Because of the moonshine he had drunk the night before, his sense of caution had dulled. Maybe he simply had not fully woken up yet, but he did not notice the bloody blotches on the grass. He did not notice that the birds were crying louder and louder. He did not notice that the shadows around him were thickening, turning the sunlight into twilight. "You look, but you do not see," someone whispered behind him in a familiar voice. Max spun around sharply. No one, only gray gloom all around, and the sky seemed to burn like a crimson fire. He felt uneasy, but he forced himself to laugh, called himself a coward, and shouted, "Hey!" The bird cries in the thicket fell silent. The ground beneath his feet trembled faintly. "Why are you yelling?" A heavy hand settled on his shoulder. "You want to wake the spirit again?" Max almost jumped. For a moment, it seemed to him that Uncle Jacob was standing beside him, looking at him with reproach. But the vision faded quickly. It was not his uncle. It was only sleepy Yuri. "Did you crap yourself?" Yuri roared with laughter, pleased with the effect he had made. Pale-faced, Max shook his head. Though, to be honest, he had come very close. "All right, sorry, Max. I didn't mean to scare you." But why are you shouting at the top of your lungs in the morning? I nearly fell off the sleeping platform. Thought something happened. I imagined something. You've been imagining a lot lately. What is that smell? Hell knows. Like a slaughterhouse, Yuri said. Then he added quietly, I don't like this. Maybe we should head home. We've had enough adventure. Maybe we have, Max agreed. Though deep inside, he was annoyed that they had learned nothing. But even stronger than that was the certainty that the most they could find here was trouble. Yuri frowned, noticing something beneath his feet. He crouched and touched something on the ground. Blood. That's why it smells like this. He rubbed the red between his fingers and looked at Max. Where did it come from? Max jumped to his feet and looked around. Scarlet blotches were everywhere, as if someone had staged a slaughter there during the night. This is bad, Max. We need to leave. Someone screamed piercingly in the forest. Maybe an animal. Maybe a bird. Maybe a person. A winter cold blew over them despite the June morning. Yuri and Max froze in place. Clutching at each other, they stared at the forest. It seemed that any moment now, someone would step out of the thicket, and they would regret ever coming here. After all, the locals had not started avoiding this part of the taiga for no reason. It was no accident they had stopped visiting the mushroom and berry places, and some had even moved away altogether, just to keep far from trouble. Some secrets must remain secrets. The taiga has released her sons. The old women's rumors came back to both Yuri and Max. We're leaving, Max whispered, pulling Yuri toward the hut. We take our things and get the hell out of here. They hurriedly threw their belongings into their backpacks and were already about to run. But then a powerful gust of wind stopped them. Icy, sharp, the kind that only comes in the dead of a brutal winter. They froze in place, rooted to the ground, unable to believe what they were seeing. A fog was spreading across the forest floor. Gray, dense. The grass beneath it turned black and shriveled. A thin crust of ice formed over the water of the lake. Yuri and Max lifted their eyes and saw bodies on the tree branches. Half-eaten bodies. Skulls shone with empty eye sockets. The wind tugged at the remains of their clothing. More bodies lay beneath the trees. Blood mixed with yellow pus seeped from the wounds in the corpses. Swollen eyes hung down over their cheeks. Crows walked around the bodies. Their bird eyes gleamed. Their beaks clicked in anticipation of the coming feast. Only they did not dare peck at the flesh. They were waiting for something. An order. Permission. Someone laughed in the thicket, clear and ringing. The earth beneath their feet shuddered in a convulsion. The taiga wants to drink. What is this? Max whispered. Steam poured from his mouth. His hands and feet were beginning to go numb from the cold. So many bodies. So many people had fallen in the forest. Who had killed them? Why? For long centuries, the taiga had endured. What had suddenly angered it? What had started it all? I don't know. We're leaving, Max, otherwise we'll be hanging beside them. Or we'll freeze to death. Yuri laughed nervously. They had already begun backing away toward the shore when the fog scattered in the blink of an eye. And with it, the bodies vanished. The devilish crows disappeared. The devilish delusion withdrew, revealing the clear image of a June morning. There was no blood, no human remains, nothing. Only the lake, the hut, and two young men frightened half to death. I don't understand what just happened. They did not tell anyone what they had seen in the forest. At first, the thought even crossed their minds that they had both gone into delirium after the old man's moonshine. But then they dismissed it. People do not share the same delirium. They went their separate ways, agreeing to meet the next day, discuss everything, and decide what to do next. That night, Max had a strange dream. He was standing near the crooked cabin and looking toward the forest. A boy was walking toward him along the path. Fair-haired, blue-eyed, white-faced, looking outwardly like an angel. He walked and smiled. Only his smile was not good. It was vicious and triumphant. The boy held a heart in his hands. A huge heart. It pulsed and beat in his grip, and Max understood that this was the heart of the taiga itself. "Run!" someone shouted right into his ear. Max turned and saw Uncle Jacob. Only he was a corpse. His dried intestines hung outside his body. "Run!" his uncle repeated, quieter this time, as if he feared the boy might hear him. But the boy began to laugh. He did not care what the uncle was saying. The taiga wants to drink. Feed the taiga. The voice was not a boy's voice. It was hoarse, sleepy, inhuman. Max woke before dawn. His heart hammered in his chest. Cold sweat drenched his body. His nose prickled. In the morning, he began packing for the road. In winter, someone said inside his head. Come back in winter. Never, Max whispered. But inside, anxiety scraped like a rat. He would return someday. He knew it. He would return. Chapter 3. Max's heart sank in his chest as he looked out the window at the winter forest. Soon, very soon, a small settlement beyond the river should appear. And then Max felt trembling seize his whole body. But he knew there was no way back. For 5 hours already, he had been rattling along in a minibus, battered by time and bad roads. The neighbor beside him smelled of fumes and sweat. Behind him, 2 student girls chattered endlessly, hurrying to share gossip with each other. Their careless talk had been getting on Max's nerves for a long time already, and he could barely restrain himself from snapping at them. The girl sitting in front was clearly worn out by the long journey. From time to time, the minibus stopped. People stepped out into the gray gloom of the winter day and disappeared into it like ghosts. Max shuddered when his turn came. He grabbed his travel bag and stepped outside. The freezing air instantly caught his breath. Max coughed, either from the cold or from the gasoline fumes the minibus left behind. He looked back. A narrow winter road. Many kilometers of the taiga. And no one in the thickening dusk. He sighed. Loneliness washed over him in a wave, and he felt almost sick with unease. Over the past 6 months, Max had declined both physically and mentally. He had begun to get sick often. He had become twitchy and nervous. At night, nightmares tormented him. Everywhere, at all times, he imagined the frost devil. That was what he had named the boy who held the heart of the taiga in his hands. The boy called to him, and the more time passed, the weaker Max felt. He felt that he did not belong in the stone jungle. He needed to go to the taiga. Otherwise, he would suffocate. 2 days earlier, throwing aside every doubt and refusing to give in to his parents' pleas to stay, he had made up his mind. He packed a bag and bought a ticket to his uncle's settlement. Snow creaked beneath his feet. The wind threw frozen grit into his face. Thick winter twilight pressed in from every side. For a moment, Max shivered and regretted not waiting one more day so he could take the direct route. This way, he still had to cross the river. He exhaled clouds of steam into the frozen air and quickened his pace. Walking between the trees on a winter evening was no joke. You could run into an animal, or something worse, and then whatever happened would not be nature's fault. A few minutes later, Max was already running. His heart pounded heavily in his chest. Yet despite that, he began to feel better. Strength slowly returned to him. Feed the taiga. The thought beat insistently in his head. No matter how Max tried to drive it away, nothing worked. On the far side, Yuri met him. He looked gaunt, with dark circles under his eyes. In their last exchange on VK, Yuri had admitted that he too was having nightmares. In those dreams, he saw the frost devil, who asked him to feed the taiga. "Well, are we going?" Yuri asked. Max nodded. There was no point standing in the cold. They walked in silence. Yuri no longer chattered without stopping the way he used to. That was nothing like him. It was as if Yuri had become a shadow of himself. But Max did not want to talk either. All his thoughts were fixed on one thing. What next? Go into the taiga? Wait? Return to the city? No. He immediately pushed the last thought away. There was no road back. "I heated the house," Yuri said when they reached Uncle Jacob's home. "Thanks." Yuri shifted from foot to foot near the door, then suggested, "Maybe I'll stay with you tonight?" Max shrugged. "Stay. Why not?" They went inside, made a simple dinner, talked a little about one thing and another, and drank a bit to mark the meeting. They lay down before 11. Yuri slept in the big room. Max slept in the bedroom. Yuri began snoring fairly quickly. Max lay awake, staring into the darkness. An unfamiliar feeling would not let him sleep. A feeling of waiting. It seemed that at any moment, the thing he had come here for would happen. Or maybe it was only his thoughts. Nothing more. The clock ticked loudly. Yuri snored. A dog howled somewhere outside. Max sat up on the bed. The dog had vanished back in autumn, with the first frosts. Yuri had written that wolves had most likely torn him apart, or that he had simply died somewhere. But they had never found his remains. He had disappeared without a trace, just like his master. He went into the taiga, Max thought for some reason. He felt thirsty. Max got up and, on tiptoes so as not to wake his friend, went into the kitchen. He scooped a full ladle of water from the bucket and drank it in one gulp. The dog kept howling. It was starting to get on his nerves. "Why can't you sleep?" Max muttered. He pulled back the yellowed curtain and looked outside. The yard was there, but there was no trampled path to the bench where his uncle had smoked. Yuri had dug only a narrow path to the house door. The rest of the yard lay buried beneath snow. Of course, Max saw no dog in the yard. He was about to go back to bed when a shadow fell from the old poplar growing in the yard. A long shadow, with 2 arms and 2 legs. The shadow of a man. Max's breath caught. He froze at the window, not daring to move, and watched as the shadow stopped being only a shadow and took on features. The features of a man he knew well. "Uncle," he whispered in astonishment. A smile spread across his face. The man did not hear him. Max burst out of the house. He ran. Or rather, he tried to run after the man, fastening the zipper on his jacket as he went. His legs sank into the deep snowdrifts. His boots tried to slip off. His hands stiffened without mittens. But his uncle, unlike him, moved lightly and quickly, as if he was not crawling through snow at all, but floating through the air like a ghost. Maybe he is a ghost, Max thought when he tumbled down the slope and miraculously did not break his neck. He got to his feet and looked back at his uncle's house, darkening on the rise. Then he looked at the human figure already trudging along the fisherman's path. It was not his uncle. Should he go back? Or follow the figure anyway? Reason insisted he return to the house before he froze. The man on the river stopped and waited. It seemed that his eyes gleamed in the winter gloom. Yellow fires, shining like a wolf's. "You look, but you do not see," the wind whispered in his uncle's voice. A cold sweat passed through Max's body. His blood ran cold. But limping, he moved toward the fisherman's path. An unknown feeling, unfamiliar until then, led him forward. He did not feel his arms and legs going numb from the cold. He did not feel the pain in his chest. Only when he reached the middle of the river did Max stop and lift his head. The starry sky was lit by the northern lights. They were so beautiful they stole his breath. The glow shimmered in every possible shade of green and violet. It seemed that at any moment, the gates to another world would open. A wall of wind. The taiga darkened. The snow sparkled. The air hummed with hard frost. The person ahead grew smaller and smaller, turning into a gray, blurred blot. Max ran with all his strength. Every inhale and exhale burst in his chest with pain. He did not remember how he reached the bank. He did not remember how he crawled through the snow, leaving a bloody trail behind him. His lungs burned from the freezing air. Blood froze at the corners of his lips. Everything swam before his eyes. At the edge of the forest, his strength finally gave out. He collapsed onto his back. The snow pleasantly cooled his overheated body. His heart pounded in his chest like a hammer. Feed the taiga. Someone was walking toward him. Snow creaked beneath heavy steps. Max raised his head. 2 figures were approaching. A bare-chested man, and holding his hand, a strange creature. At first glance, it could have been mistaken for a child. Only the creature's arms and legs were thin and twisted. Its head was covered with sparse hair. Its ears stuck out like flaps. It looked almost ridiculous. Only its eyes gleamed viciously in the dark. There, Polly. Blood of our blood. Young. Strong. Max heard a familiar voice. He was ready to argue with the last part. But he had no strength even for that. He came himself, just as he was supposed to. "No," Max rasped. At once, he received a heavy boot to the stomach. The world around him flared crimson for a moment. Darkness filled his eyes. Max fell into unconsciousness, where the crowns of pine spun above him. They spun ominously, and whispered, "Feed the taiga." Through the roar of the wind, he heard something else. Max came to himself from a sharp shout. "Get the hell away from him." With difficulty, Max opened his eyes. It was already getting light. A few meters away stood another person. It took several minutes for Max's gaze to focus. Yuri. His friend was holding a shotgun. "Get away from him." Yuri roared again. The bolt clicked threateningly. Only now did Max feel pain. The creature had sunk its teeth into his arm and was sucking blood. "Feed the taiga." Max got to his feet and tried to shake the monster off. He managed it. The small body slapped into the snow and squealed. Polly, Uncle Jacob, overgrown and emaciated after the long months he had spent in the taiga, howled like a madman. The creature continued screeching too. Its squeals made Max's head begin to buzz. He barely managed to stagger over to his friend. His arm burned like fire. Nausea rose into his throat. Both of them looked at Uncle Jacob, who was rocking the monster in his arms. "The taiga, great mother the taiga. She gave me a chance," his uncle muttered. "She promised to return my son, my little one. Days and nights, living among the forests. Blood for blood. Feed the taiga. Feed your son." Uncle Jacob howled like a wolf. The air reeked of death. Not far away lay the corpse of a dog. Frozen. Dried. Half-gnawed. Max understood that it was Brutus. "Oh, Brutus. Brutus, Brutus, boy. You came yourself. You fed Polly. And you, Maxie. You came to us yourself, too." The longer Max listened to his uncle, the stronger the desire became to walk toward him, reach out to the monster, and let whatever happened happen. "Step back." Yuri barked at Jacob. That brought Max back to his senses. His uncle lifted a pale, bloodless face. Max shook off the last remnants of the spell. His whole body ached and burned. "Don't you dare touch my son. He never got to live at all, and the taiga gave him a chance." Tears streamed down his uncle's face. "What are you saying, Uncle?" Only then did Max notice that the monster in his uncle's arms was changing. Its gray skin was turning pink. Hair was growing out. Little blue eyes blinked. Blackened lips parted. "Shoot it!" Yuri screamed. A shot rang out. Then another. Bloody scraps scattered across the white snow. Scarlet blood stained the ground. The air stank of sulfur and rot. The forest groaned threateningly. The wind twisted in a wild spiral. But nature rebelled only for a brief moment. Then everything fell silent again. "Bastards!" Uncle Jacob rose to his feet. He took several steps, absurdly waving the stumps of his hands. Blood sprayed in different directions. Narrow strips of flesh slid from his body, exposing gray bones. Like a zombie, he moved toward the young men, until several more shots tore his head apart. Max and Yuri froze where they stood. The smell of gunpowder and blood hung in the air. The riverbank looked like a battlefield. "Undead," Yuri said after a while, his voice trembling. "I told you a long time ago." "Yeah. How are you, Max?" "I'll live." "That's good. How are we going to explain this?" Max asked, looking around. Yuri shrugged. After a couple of seconds, he offered, "I was saving my friend from a mad hermit." Max smiled. "Let's get the hell out of here, Max." "That's for sure." Fine snow began falling from the sky, quickly covering the bloody massacre that had played out on the riverbank. Two human figures trudged along the hunting trail, constantly looking back to make sure the nightmare had ended, to make sure nothing else had crawled out of the endless forests of the taiga.